It's a really exciting day in Cambridge's civic calendar today. It's Bin Emptying Scrutiny Day. So I'm here at the Guildhall in Cambridge where the Environment Scrutiny Committee is due to start shortly. One of the things that the Environment Scrutiny Committee will be considering is the crisis that we've had recently in emptying of Cambridge's bins. Now, bin emptying is something which is really important. If you ask people what they care about in terms of what Cambridge City Council does, the top answer is emptying the bins. And for many people, emptying the bins is pretty much what they get from Cambridge City Council in return for paying their council tax. Now, recently there have been thousands of bins every week that haven't been emptied when they've been due to be emptied by Cambridge City Council. Now, that's something which today our councillors will get a chance to question the Executive Councillor for bins on. Now, previously, the only person who's interviewed an Executive Councillor for bins since the crisis started is me. I caught the previous Executive Councillor, Councillor Roberts, as he was leaving the Guildhall a few weeks ago. There was no opportunity at a recent, there was intended to be a recent full council, but that was cancelled due to the elections. So there was no opportunity there for councillors to question Councillor Roberts before he left the role. The new councillor, who's been in post now for about a month, is Councillor Rosie Moore. Now, I've made a freedom of information request which I made after some people working in the bin emptying service got in touch with me to suggest things which I could usefully ask and could usefully inform councillors in their decision-making process. And hopefully that will help councillors scrutinise the Executive Councillor today. Something that I found out was that there are no regular reports, no regular management reports on the performance of the service or the costs of the service. Now, perhaps that's something which the new Executive Councillor will have put in place since coming into office. We'll see that today. It's also really interesting that in response to my FOI request, the council had to provide the information which I asked for, and it's interesting that that's different in many ways than the information which has been voluntarily put forward to councillors by council officers. For example, it includes information on the amount of agency workers that are used and on managers who have been filling in because of a lack of staff to work emptying the bins. Now, the problems, it's important not to overstate the problems. There are thousands of bins being unemptied every week still in Cambridge. However, the council is catching up with those within a day or so. But there are a handful of people who are reporting a build-up of rubbish in their homes, and that's, of course, particularly problematic for people who live in houses or in terraces where they don't have a place outside of the house to put their bins. And we've also heard at the area committees that there's been a particular problem emptying bins from flats. I think that's a slightly different issue there. There's also, of course, as the Environment Scrutiny Committee, there's lots of things on the agenda tonight which are of interest. The core area conservation area assessment is up for discussion by councillors. That's pretty interesting. You can see colleges in particular getting in touch preemptively, trying to ensure that council's policies don't go against what they might want to do in the future in terms of modifying their buildings so that they can keep them in use for teaching, for learn and for accommodation. So that'll be an interesting discussion. I don't think that there really is too much tension between between the academic use of the colleges and the character, maintaining the character of Central Cambridge. But that is one of the items that's up for discussion. We've also got an item on environmental health. That's something I've taken a great interest in over the time that I've been in Cambridge. So that's the inspection of restaurants, for example, to make sure that they're safe. I think we're not doing as much as we could be doing and as much as other councils are doing in terms of publicising what's done and publicising the reports. But things have improved a little. One thing I discovered by reading the papers for today's meeting is that the council actually has a role in looking at communicable infectious diseases. I actually didn't realise before today that the council had that role. Of course, I was aware of the way public health is managed in the county. We've got the Director of Public Health now in the County Council, accountable to councillors there. We've got presumably a consultant in communicable disease control in Adam Brooks, and in an emergency we'd have those people and the chief executives of our local councils taking control, as well as, of course, with national help from Public Health England and other national bodies. But I wasn't aware that actually locally we've got council staff investigating infectious diseases. So I'm really interested. I'd like to know sort of some details on that. It'd be really good to know what kind of things that what kind of problems they're investigating. Is it things like measles outbreaks due to lack of vaccinations in schools? For example, what are the issues in Cambridge? That's something which doesn't come out in the report because there's a lack of transparency. What we do know is that there have been 60 communicable disease, infectious disease investigations that have been carried out in the last year that's being reported on, and they had a target of 100. Now, and they've got a target of 100 again next year. Now, it'd be interesting to know whether not meeting that target is actually a good thing because there haven't been referrals, there haven't been cases of infectious diseases to look into, or whether or not there are lots of cases and the council's only been able to investigate 60 of them. It's always a good question to ask when you're presented with a number and a target, and you've got the question of, is it a good thing or a bad thing that that target hasn't been met? So that's some of the things that I'm hoping might get discussed here this evening. I've arrived about, I think I'm about 10 minutes or so before the meeting, and I'm going to go in. I'm not expecting any problems at all reporting on today's meeting because it's a formal committee of the council in one of the committee rooms in the Guildhall, so it shouldn't be an issue. So I'm here now at the Guildhall just 5 minutes before the Environment Scrutiny Committee is due to start, and the doors are closed here and there's no sign up to direct people where to go. Now I know, because I'm a regular attender at meetings here, that the likelihood is that one of the side doors of the Guildhall will be open and I'll be able to find my way to the meeting room. But I do think it's particularly poor to have public council meetings, scrutiny committee meetings, held at the Guildhall, but to have the front doors here locked and for there to be no notice on saying where the meeting is. Just demonstrate that these doors are, well and truly, they're locked doors. It's not very welcoming to members of the public.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're sitting comfortably. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of the Environment Scrutiny Committee. Spare copies of the agenda and related reports are at the back of the room, so please help yourselves. My name is Councillor Gawthorpe and I'm the chair of this committee. We're also joined by Executive Councillor for Environment Services and City Centre, that's Councillor Rosie Moore, and the Executive Councillor for Planning Policy and Transport, who will be joining us later, Kevin Wanko at the back of the room there. On each agenda item, and after hearing the deliberation of the Scrutiny Committee, it is the responsibility of the Executive Councillor to make the formal decision. Debate will take place if the item is key or has been called in. For information, items 7 and 11 have been called in for debate. And I have given permission for Councillor O'Connell and Ward Councillor for Troppington to take place in the debate for item 7. Councillor Roberts, former Executive Councillor for Environment Services and City Centre, will address the committee on this item. I would like to advise the committee that there will be no officer present for item 12. This is a non-key item and has not been called in for debate. So when it comes to this item, I will ask the Executive Council to agree the recommendation. The officers at the table representing the first report of the meeting is Karen O'Connor, Team Manager for Commercial and Licensing. Other officers may join us throughout the course of the meeting, and I will introduce them at the start of the relevant agenda items. Suzanne Hemmingford, Strategic Director. This one now is Suzanne Hemingway. Hemmingford. Strategic Director will be present throughout the meeting. Can I remind all those present of the importance of using microphones at all times when speaking? Please speak close to and clearly into the microphone. And also remember to switch your microphones off when you've finished speaking. I would encourage any members of the public having difficulty hearing the discussion to raise their hand or an alert. Can everybody hear me at the back there? Yes. Good. Members of the public who have registered to address the committee under public questions item will be asked to join us at the table. All may speak from the public gallery if they prefer. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to ask a question or make a statement, followed up by up to 2 minutes for supplementary questions or statement. Filming and audio recording of this meeting is permitted. The process of the main agenda, process for each of the main agenda items will be: the relevant officer will give a brief introduction to her report. The Scrutiny Committee will then discuss the item, if the item is for debate, and may ask questions of the officer and/or the Executive Council for clarification. At the end of the deliberation, I will ask the committee to vote by a show of hands on the officer's recommendation. In the event of a tied vote, as chair, I will have the casting vote. At this stage, the Executive Councillor will be asked to make her decision. If the view of the Executive Councillor differs from the view of the Scrutiny Committee, the decision will be deferred to the Leader of the Council. For the comfort of councillors, officers and the public, I may choose to call short breaks during the proceedings. If councillors or officers require a break at any point, please indicate to me, and I will halt proceedings at the first opportunity. We now move on to the items as listed on the printed agenda. Number one, have we any apologies? Thank you very much. Next is declarations of independence. Declarations of interest. It's getting too close to July the 4th, isn't it? Declarations of interest. I might remind members that you can declare an interest at any point throughout the proceedings. Are there any? No, carry on. We come to the minutes of the meetings held on the 17th of January and the 25th of May 2017 as a correct record. Can I approve these minutes? I will do. I've just been reminded that the fire brigade are in the building, and there may well be a fire alarm test. I'm asking, what I'm saying to people now is that will be a test only, and it won't be a real fire. Well, hopefully. So.
Facilities will be upstairs too.
Okay. So, have we any public questions? Well, that's item 4 out of the way. 5A, decision taken by Executive Councillor. 5A, planning application fees. Now, what did you text it? It's just a note. Okay. So that's just noting that decision. Item 6, which is on page 45, business plan, regulation plan 2017-18, an outturn report of Karen O'Connor to present.
Thank you, Chair. As we said, this is the business regulation plan for 2017-18 going forward, which includes the outturn for 2016-17. So it covers the commercial and environmental health functions at Cambridge City, which are primarily food safety and health and safety. It's a statutory obligation to produce the plan and to undertake the functions. Just by way of information, we have approximately 1,300 food businesses and about 2,500 health and safety businesses with that. So initially looking back at 2016-17, starting on page 65 if you want to follow it, we undertook a total of 1,062 interventions as broken down on the table there, and that's approximately 84% of the original target. And in relation to health and safety on the following page, it was 347 interventions, which is about 33%, so a smaller percentage. There were a couple of changes throughout the year, primarily staffing in some areas with a couple of vacant posts or gap posts for a period of time, and so the resources were focused on the highest risk areas in food safety. there were also a couple of changes on the health and safety side over the years, the last couple of years on the types of visits we're meant to do, so that perhaps is partly reflective of our intervention target, not reflecting some of those changes. Moving forward into the 2017-18 plan going forward, which is on pages 69 and 70 for the tables if you want them. We have a target of 1,438 for the food safety and health and safety 390. That smaller number reflecting our obligations and how they've changed over the time. And we're also proposing that of the lower risk foods we undertake only 75% of the Ds and 50% of the Es, which are the lower risk food items. I mentioned staffing, and going forward we currently have a 0.8 vacant post because part of the changes this year has been one post which now covers not only commercial environmental health but licensing, which means there's a reduction in manager time on that, so we're looking to restructure slightly within the service as well. So that 0.8 vacant post will be brought into that, which hopefully will be all sorted by October. And that's the main outturn. What I'd like to ask, the recommendation is that the Exec Councillor approve the business plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now throw it open to the floor. Councillor Tarncoat.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the Executive Councillor how satisfied she is with the merger of the two departments and the staff reduction in view of the increased demand, which is quite significant, and how can the service levels be guaranteed?
Is anybody else also right? All right, carry on.
Thank you, Councillor Tunnicliffe. At the moment, I do feel confident that although we didn't reach our targets last year, as I understand, that was due to a shortage of staff and also changes in the regulations, as Karen O'Connor has told us. And working forwards, we will have slightly different targets and we plan to reach them.
Yes, I can see that there is some goodwill there, but bearing in mind the significant increase in demand, it just seems to me there is a gap there which ought to be addressed. I mean, we are, after all, talking about public health, and if one's reducing the staff levels here, it does sort of send alarm bells. And has the Executive Council thought of some reorganisation which might avoid staff reductions?
Karen, did you want to come in on this?
Thank you. Yes, it might be worth also noting that in foresight of the restructure as well, and part of our planning to it, we are in the process of amending slightly how we do, in particular, food inspections for all visits to our businesses, and not as norm following up with letters, but leaving reports of visit on site. So we're looking to find some efficiencies on time there, because people aren't having to come back and effectively type a letter. They're handwriting a report. The business will always have the option of asking for a letter, and I've found elsewhere that makes quite a significant time saving. Also, on the lowest risk that we have, we're allowed to do them by an alternative means of sending like a questionnaire that we then assess, and obviously if that flags issues, we look at that, and that is normal practice across other authorities. So I'm looking to introduce some more efficiencies as well.
Any more? Councillor Bird.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just a bit confused about item 6 because surely it's no debate.
There's debate and asking questions. So it's not a key decision, so. Okay. So, well, if that's the case, then we'll move straight to the recommendation then. There's a lacking on my part, perhaps I shouldn't have put it out to the council. So, the recommendation is for the Executive Councillor to approve the Business Regulation Plan for 2017-18. All those in favour? Yeah. Does the Executive Councillor approve of the recommendation?
I do approve of the recommendation.
So we move on to item 7, which is on page 89. And the report on share services and report will be from Jane Hunt. I'll let you carry on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gorthrope. I just wanted to clarify as well, we actually have 2 reports in the pack which have been merged together slightly. The first is the draft annual report for 2016-17, which is a standard and will-be annual report coming to committee. And the second is the officer-led shared waste service bin day collection initial project review. So I think it might be helpful if we just take those in order. Alongside me, I'm pleased to say, Mike Parsons, our operations manager, who's been able to join the meeting this afternoon. Between us, we hope we can answer any questions during the debate while the meeting's taking anything away. So I'll start with the annual report, just as an overview. What you'll see on your first page of the report is a recap to the background of the shared waste service, which was created in October 14 following discussion within South Cambs City. And we've seen quite a lot of progress, obviously, since 2014 on, for example, moving to a shared depot and all the various changes associated with that. Progress in 2016-17 has been quite significant. Key aspects following the depot changes and the recruitment of the senior management team was that the commercial service, both commercial services from South Cambs and the City, were brought into the shared waste service, which until then had been focused only on domestic services and the street cleansing operation in South Cambridgeshire. That team has now also relocated to the Water Beach depot. We've also been through a process towards the end of last calendar year of consulting on, and then early this year, in February, transferring the remaining previously city employed staff to the employment of South Cambridgeshire District Council as the lead authority for the shared waste service. And we've also completed a restructure of the majority of the office-based teams, with the exception being the commercial service. The next major part of the shared waste plan was obviously to look at bin round changes and to optimise the domestic route collections, and that's obviously the subject of the next paper in any case. Those are key activities in 2016-17. And then you have in section 3 outlined the priorities as we see them for 2017-18. A huge part of the day-to-day work of the shared waste service is domestic and now obviously commercial as well, collection services. That's the vast majority of what our workforce spend their time doing, and the continued optimisation of rounds, which actually happens fortnightly, is something that will take up the vast majority of the service's time in the coming year, or in this year that we're now in. Obviously, and as we'll discuss later, further changes to domestic bin rounds are normal part of the job, but they are continuing apace further to the initial changes brought in February. So that's a huge priority for certainly for Mike and his operational team. We're also, as with any organisation, I think after a period of change, looking at making sure all the staff who are currently largely in new roles have the training and support that they need. A huge proportion, obviously, of the jobs, of the tasks that the service delivers remain the same, but individuals do have changes to their roles, and that's something we must reflect and support them with over the coming years. So we're embedding some of those changes. And we also have priorities, particularly around fleet replacement, ownership and management. We've recently moved all of the maintenance of owned vehicles across to Cambridge City's garage, for example, and continuing our work on how we manage our fleet. And health and safety, we now have a a proportion of which is dedicated to ensuring the safe operation of the fleet and our operatives, as well as office-based staff, and keeping up with and prioritising further activities on health and safety is also a key issue for us. You've also got a list of other priorities, all of which are worth specific mention, as I've said, but probably smaller in scope, particularly for City. But the last sentence is important, which is obviously the new permanent head of service, Trevor Nichol, has been recruited and will be starting at the service in September, and I will be staying as interim head of service until that time to assure a good handover.
Thank you for that. And as this wasn't this is a long key item, however, it has been called in for debate. So I'll try open to the floor. We do have two speakers, Councillor O'Connell and Peter Roberts.
Can you just give us some guidance? There are two reports, as Jane has indicated. Are we having?
I think
one before we go on to the other, or? I think that would be
the way to proceed, because they're like I say, they are two separate reports. So we'll take the first one first. It's the annual report on single shared weight services. So you will come in, Councillor Big.
Thanks, Chair. With reference to this report, then, the report records the fact that that the staff, apart from the management, who were already employed by South Cambridgeshire, were transferred into South Cambridgeshire's employment during this year. And I understand that a decision was taken to leave the two groups of employees on different terms and conditions of employment after doing that. And I wondered if officers could explain the advantages of pursuing the route of leaving people on different terms and conditions of employment whilst supporting an integrated service.
Thank you. The transfer obviously was subject to standard consultation with crew members and also with unions. And I think it's fair to say the outcome for the single shed race service, from an operational point of view, there is another layer of complexity in dealing with separate terms and conditions, but that's entirely manageable and it's something we are used to working with. I think the majority of the discussion and debate around the limited number of changes we could make around, for example, pay date and other things, were very much influenced by wider ongoing discussions across the councils on harmonisation or the streamlining of the various terms and conditions for staff, and that's something we continue to have an ongoing involvement with. It's certainly our intention that we certainly pay, reward and support all staff equally, and that's something that we would like to see in future, but we appreciate we're part of wider discussions on the part of the council.
Yes, I think that the reason for my question is that it's probably quite difficult from the outside to understand how you can really create one team and an integrated team, which is what we needed for the shared service to work at, as well as it should do, to understand how that's possible when we aren't treating all the staff equally. I mean, I accept that's the aspiration, but it clearly isn't the case. And I wonder, I mean, do we have crews made up of people, individual crews made up of different people on different terms and conditions of employment from each other? Or have we actually got sort of city conditions crews and South Cambs conditions crews?
We do have crews day to day who will be out operating who work to different terms and conditions. I would also say that obviously South Cambridgeshire, those who were originally recruited and retained by South Cambridgeshire are perceived by many to have elevated or advantages over those previously employed by City, and those previously City employees on City terms and conditions who wish to transfer to a South Cambridgeshire contract are entirely eligible to do so, and that will be supported by the service.
Can I just say on these sorts of issues where there is it's like when a firm amalgamates, there's always going to be a discussion about harmonisation in terms and conditions, and as long as the officers and the union work together, so we can make this process as painless as possible, I can't see a problem.
I can just come back, Chair, on your comment. I mean, I'm fully aware and quite experienced in bringing organisations together, and normally it's item number 1 on the agenda after the transfers to harmonise terms and conditions of employment, to remove barriers between employers working closely together. That was the reason for my question, but I got an answer clearly.
Okay. So if there's no more on that, then we'll move to the second half of the ABCD project review, and that's Jane again.
Thank you very much. So the report you have in front of you is the initial project review, which is something we routinely undertake where we deliver major projects. This review covers the period covering planning and design of the domestic bin collection changes through to the 3rd month of operations. It, as I said, has been a major project and a very key part of the original plan of delivering a shared waste service. It's affected 82% of residents, and we service over 120,000 residents across both authority geographies. We've obviously got a previous historical pattern of collections, which when mapped has been a patchwork quilt for Mike to manage in terms of sending out vehicles and crews and operating to really quite different collection regimes as well. The intention of the project obviously is to make that operation more efficient, operation easier, and give us more flexibility when dealing with growth, which obviously is a major part of the future of the city particularly. It's a fairly lengthy and detailed report, so I'll take most of it as read. The key things I would draw out is that this has been a project which has been designed, to 90% of the work, or 95% of the work in the planning and design and implementation of the project has been done in-house. We do benefit from having a huge amount of experience within the service. We've dealt with bin day changes both in South Kensal City before now. We also have a data and modelling team, and as I say, a lot of experience on the part of crews, drivers and loaders in delivering these sorts of changes. So the majority of the work was done in-house, but we did have some quality assurance done for us as well. The planning and design really used an awful lot of different elements. First, simply logic, and I think that can be illustrated also by the map, which shows how we've tried to group collection days geographically around the geography. Software, which is hugely important. There will always be debates about whether or not we use common sense or computers, but obviously for us it's important to use both. This is a huge logistical operation. It is a massive set of over 320 rounds. We collect over 30,000 bins daily, and the sort of detail that goes into the planning of that change programme is huge. And we are supported very definitely by bespoke software, as the majority of local authorities use. People, obviously, who do this, who collect bins, are a key part of our business, and we've tried various routes to make sure that the drivers and loaders, the supervisors and those with other experience have had an input to helping design the rounds. And obviously member briefings, particularly drawing on member experience on communicating with residents as well, has been a useful part of the process, important part of the process. And the communications programme was all designed and implemented from within the shared waste service itself, with support from the communications staff within each authority. The go live phase actually covered more than 2 months, because obviously there's a huge amount of work that happens from the moment we've agreed the individual day changes, largely around communications, right up to the day of implementation, where the first crews left the depot to go and collect a renewal regime. Communications proved particularly effective, so we had a very low proportion of residents presenting the wrong colour bins. We'll never know the true proportion, because on any one day residents choose not to present their bins anyway. But it was a very, very small number, which was very reassuring. And from the beginning of day changes, obviously, we were very alert to what was happening day to day and wanted to make sure that where there were any concerns or issues with delivery, that we were communicating that very quickly to residents. So we had an internal group which spoke daily at 2 p.m. on phone conferences to exchange information and make sure that that information or any service updates went public as soon as possible. We did, as we expected, have some problems initially, and these are listed in your paper, starting at the end of page 96. Major concern for the service is whenever we miss any collect and return bins or assisted collections, as they're referred in South Cambridgeshire. These are folk who need some assistance with their bin being retrieved from their property, emptied and returned, rather than leaving it curbside. They're often the most vulnerable, and they're the people that we prioritise if we have any service issues. We did have some issues with addresses being missed, and we have since had some addresses repeatedly missed, which we've been trying to address as a priority. And we list, obviously, within the paper those actions which we've taken to try and rectify it. Second issue was collection from flats. And again, we list that as we took a different approach to flats because of the way in which flat refuse is generally collected, and we took a different approach to communicating with residents in flats, which we learned from. However, since pretty much week 2, when we worked extensively with other teams, including housing, streets and open spaces, we've prioritised obviously those rounds in terms of both getting the rounds right and also supporting those crew, or that particular crew, with an extra vehicle to make sure that flats actually are the last likely to be missed. The issue obviously with flats is you don't have a huge amount of capacity. If you do miss a day or two, then that can quickly lead to overflowing refuse, which causes our collectors issues. One of the other issues which affected flats has also affected other properties has been around software integration. So we work with 2 different software systems for South Cambs and City, and we rely on merging data from those to provide real-time information live to each cab. Each crew has that as they go out about their rounds. The integration of that software has caused us real problems since the go live, but we have now resolved that, which is an update to your paper. So all of our vehicles either have or are currently receiving by satellite all of the updates to all of the 320 rounds for every colour of collection. As we've identified, some of the problems, particularly with flats, could have been preempted. And although we don't think we would have taken the initial round planning differently, we would have involved more crew members in a different way in looking at the draft rounds, and communicated in a different way separately to residents of flats. Finally, we've had some differences in crew approaches, which has caused us an unexpected level actually of concerns and comments from residents, largely where we request crews check waste routinely for contamination and for wrong things basically in wrong bins and other things, and some crews obviously have been quite lenient in the past. When they've had a change in crew, that's obviously brought out both us and some residents, and we have now asked the crews to be consistent obviously in what they're picking up, and we are trying to help residents, particularly picking up the first instance of contamination and dealing with it appropriately to give them that leeway. You have the outcomes to date, which I won't go through in terms of detailed numbers, but for the vast majority of residents, a continued good service has been achieved. That's not to say we don't learn from those who haven't had a good level of service, and every bin is important to us. But as I say, our key priority is to make sure residents knew which bins to present on which day initially, and then to make sure that we could keep up our collection at high levels and to not drop below 94%. You can see statistics in a table looking at the percentages collected as planned, which is one of our key performance indicators routinely. And we've also made the distinction between individual missed bins, where a crew was there and simply missed that one, and those which resulted from crews simply not getting to that whole street. And the number of missed streets has declined significantly, partly because we are changing rounds to reflect crew feedback on those which are too big, but also where we need to make sure that crews have now learned rounds, got more familiar with them, and have simply increased the speed at which they're completed. Since the report was finalised, weeks 16 and 17 have been completed at 99.18% and 98.78%. You also have a little bit further information there on some of the other key things we were hoping to achieve with window changes. One of which was that no resident would then have to endure a further change to their bin day. We have changed the day for fewer than 300 residents, and largely at resident request, or where we've not identified an issue with bins being presented on the street other than the postal address. I skipped to ongoing activity, and we have obviously further updates from this, as this is a 2-week-old paper, but I think significantly, for example, almost 50% of blue bin bans have been changed since the window changes, which we would expect where we have additional properties, but also is largely a result of crew feedback, where things haven't made sense, where rounds have been a bit big, or we needed to swap them, and the benefit of working in that way where all bins on the same day are in the same portion of the city. And South Cambridge helps because we can move those quantities across from round to round without any impact being felt by residents. Hopefully with an improvement where we have missed bins before. As I said, there's a huge amount of other work going on, and some of those have already been achieved, particularly in relation to software updates. The recommendations that we're making here is that we present further analysis to the Waste Board, which has delegated authority for overseeing the operation of the waste service by both councils. We would propose to do that in 3 months, which would include further information on costs, the wider lessons learnt feedback, because we've had a structured process externally facilitated by another council employee in South Cambridgeshire, which has included all the staff members without me present, feeding back on what they felt worked well and what didn't. So we'd like to feedback on that, some review of the modelling work which was undertaken, and a summary of complaints and recommendations, and that we propose to take the Waste Board in 3 months' time, which was the previous schedule. And also that the learning points that we have identified against paper, things we would adopt again and things which we would avoid, are adopted or avoided in future change projects. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my intention to, there's 2 councillors that requested to come in and speak on this. I think I'll bring in Councillor Roberts first, because he did a lot of work as the previous executive council with this responsibility. Then I'll bring in Councillor O'Connell, and then I'll throw it open to the floor. So, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I was planning basically to contribute to the discussion rather than to say anything in particular at the beginning, but I think James covered it pretty holistically. Obviously, any change of this scale is a massive change for a council, and in living memory, it's happened twice, maybe 3 times if you go back far enough. Many of the issues that happened last time were improved on, I would say, based on the members of staff we have that cross over that period. And while with any change of this size there are clear issues that occasionally do come up, and it's important as a council obviously that for any future change which will happen in 10, 15 or 20 years that we learn from what's happened in this one as we did in the previous one before my time. Overall, I think the service in relation to the first item as well as the second item is performing very, very well, considering the total level of retrenchment that's expected on it is quite high. We are meeting our saving targets, and I'm relatively confident we will going forward over the next few years of the plan, and as we move into the 3rd phase in the process.
Councillor O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. My ward, as most of you will know, is Trumpington Ward. It's a very brief bit of background, mostly for committee members, because I'm sure the officers know already. Trumpington was worst hit. I think probably sounds worse than it is, but inevitably there was going to be a part of the city where the change in bin days was largest due to the change in cycle. And Trumpington was the one ward in the city, I think, where that happened. The plan was there was going to be a 3.5 to 4 week gap for some people for bin collections. I think it was 24 days delay between bin collections of the same colour. That was unavoidable, nature of the change. Trumpington was already creaking at the seams a little bit. We were actually hopeful these changes would solve some of these problems. That's down to growth on the southern fringe and problems completely not of the council's making. A common one I've dealt with more than once would be, why haven't my bin been collected? I investigate, and the answer is, well, the developers never told us there's anyone in that block of flats. So there was already a negative perception from some people. When the change happened, there was a lot of very negative feedback that I received almost straight away. And my first question is to do with the figures on page 99 of the report. The sort of early figures we're seeing sort of, ignoring week 2, it's an outlier, we're seeing sort of 97-98% collection rate. And you know, then it came up again, it's dropped back down again to sort of 98%. Now I'm a bit concerned by that because my perception as a councillor is that things have slowly improved over the intervening weeks. If these figures include all bins, I'm worried that we're getting complaint fatigue from residents. I know some people did stop complaining to me because they perceived nothing was happening. So I was trying to get clarification on whether these figures covered absolutely all bins, including ones that were initially missed because they weren't known about the flats. Because if they were included in the figures, then I'm a bit worried. If they weren't included, then I'm happy with the figures because I think there has been more of an improvement than is shown in these numbers. The second point is that we saw in full council there's definitely a different perception between councillors in various parts of the city as to how well things have worked. My colleagues did ask for some geographic data on where the failures, where the problems with bin collection have been, because the only breakdown we've got is individual versus, city versus South Cams. I'm a bit worried that if, you know, for whatever reason it's closer to the depot, the north and east of the city is faring better than the south and the west, we're just going to keep sitting here and yelling at each other because we don't have data to validate or refute the difference in perception. I'm also worried whether that lack of data is a problem with the reporting system or just getting it in a format that's been given to councillors, because as I understand it from a freedom of information request, there are quite a few agency workers currently kind of having to shore up the service, and there will sort of be a gradual reduction in, you know, the number of agency workers to reduce cost. I'm a bit worried that we're going to see a backslide in the quality of service in Crumpington if the data isn't available and the Executive Council is hearing from her colleagues everything's fine and we're saying it's not, because the raw numbers aren't telling us where the problems are. I think that pretty much covers my questions actually. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and take all these in turn, but tell me if I've missed one. Yeah. Trumpington is an identified area where we have problems. So, as we say in the report, that's one of the areas where we are planning to make changes to the rounds. With regards, to bring one of your later points, to the north or the west Suffolk, for example, we have not directed or prioritised effort in a particular way for anything other than operational and logistical reasons. So that's the priority. We had a lot of problems initially in the northern part of the city, for example in Chesterton, Kings Hedges and Albury areas, where we made changes very early on. And we have not yet made the changes to Trumpington for a couple of reasons. Our inherent problem, which we have acknowledged here, is that the rounds we designed for Trumpington, for blue and green in particular, are too big. So we want to make the changes, and in the meantime we've been sending additional vehicles to reduce the impact on residents, and also starting crews where possible at a different road each time, so it's not always the same road at the end of the round that gets missed, if one gets missed. What we are doing there is we can't confirm until about week 7 or 8, which is, I know, could be frustrating, whether or not rounds are working or not, because for the first 3 or 4 weeks, as you've identified, we have some bins were collected a week later than normal, some a week earlier, some people chose not to present. So you have to get through the first few weeks of the cycles to actually understand what isn't working. But by about week 7 or 8, we knew that Trumpington wasn't going to be easy to deal with, so we put extra resources there. We didn't make the changes straight away there because of the problem with the software. And we are permanently weighing up sort of risks on a daily basis, really. But if we're to make big changes to rounds without the software being right, we rely on maps. Crews, as you may have heard, are struggling with some of the mapped data, and we also can't highlight very easily collect and return addresses on maps. So we've taken the decision not to change the rounds until we've got that software right. Then we're more confident that when we make the change, every crew and every vehicle that goes out can see on the screen those collect and return addresses. So now that this week the updates have gone out to cabs, we're prioritising which rounds to change next. And as I said in the paper, Shumpington is one of those, so we've identified that Shumpington and Clay Farm as particular areas. With regard to flats, the data we present here is as much as we can assure it, as accurate as we can make it. We're dealing with two different data systems, two different mechanisms for extracting data, and if anything, we think there is some over-reporting because where an individual resident flags as a missed bin, it belongs to the missed bin, where we later identify that whole street was missed. We don't put the processing power into taking one out and adding a road, we just add it all. So if anything, we think there is an overestimate there. Flats caused a lot of problems and affected a lot of individual residents for a finite period of time, and we hit it hard early when we knew there was a problem because we can't let flats build up. So I'm confident that the numbers here are a fair reflection of the actual service that we achieved. And we have had, since early on in the process, you say, continued improvement with the exception of 3 individual weeks. One which I know caused us concern was around vehicles, where we had exceptional problems with vehicles, the likes of which we've not had before. One was around staff shortage, particularly on a make-up Saturday, which was unavoidable. We spoke to all the staff concerned, and there was a coincidence of issues there. And last week we saw service drop slightly, largely because of the heat. And we have asked crews, do ask them to work safely, so that's something we support. But we keep an eye on it, but we've got the figures from last week already, we work to it all the time, and that's a big priority for us to see those percentages rising. With regards to the geographical data, I would also love a heat map, as it were, of where it's worst, as it were. That, for me, the biggest priority is making sure that those who are directing the crews every day and who are making the changes to the rounds have that and understand that and know that. And they really do. The team managers are amazing. The crews absolutely get geography and they get where they're missing and where they're going to struggle on a daily basis, if that's the case. What we don't have is one mapping system that works across both IT systems and can visually show that in an easy way. And I've not prioritised, because it would be an external consultant basically helping us with the mapping, doing that. What we do have are lists of frequently missed streets, which we issue whenever we have an update, and frequently missed individual properties. And that, for me, is the priority, is making sure that information, in whatever format, gets to those best, as it were. We've also looked at trying, for example, to cut the data by ward to send it to individual councillors for information, and that's actually proved, again, a level which operationally the systems don't reflect that sort of political boundary, so it's hard to actually map that. But again, on an individual basis, we can look at what we can produce. It's just the sort of time taken to do that for the whole service. And finally, agency workers, and whether or not that's a reflection. So we've responded recently to an FOI request, which has shown some of the increases in agency costs, particularly in the last couple of months. And those are in line with what we expect for when we deliver a change. So we just get more staff in. We've got 3 extra vehicles, which means extra additional workers who we don't recruit permanently to come in and help during this period. We always have a percentage of our spend on agency workers, because for us it's a really good way of operating a flexible service. We can never afford to have folk sitting in a crew room not going out, but what we also can't afford is to not have crews going out and collecting the bins. So that agency input really helps us balance it, and it's also actually a really good pool for us to recruit from. People like to come and give the job a go. It's, it is a really hard job, and people need to give it a go and we need to recruit from them. So I'm confident that where we recruit through an agency, that's just a routine part of the job for us. We have seen an increase in spend on agency workers, but overall we have seen that we're coming in at or under budget on overall staffing costs, regardless of those changes. I think, does that address your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. You mentioned that crews had the ability to highlight individual properties and streets were being missed very regularly. I think that's key. I think it's very useful because as a ward councillor, I'm more likely to get complaints if they keep seeing their bins missed. So if the pain is spread a little bit, that certainly does help with the public perception of the service.
Councillor Vick.
Thanks, Chair. As I've experienced this and listened to colleagues, including Councillor O'Connell, it seems that there are two kinds of problems. Let's say three kinds of problems in people having their bins missed over this period. The first seems to be resulting from the distribution of work between crews in the new routes, where judgments may have been made and proved tough to actually implement in the event, and therefore bins might have got missed until the crews got fully familiar with their geography, and those bins then were picked up at a later time. The second is requires a bit more understanding than I have at the moment. It's that some bins, their existence was not even known, and so it wasn't a question of people not having the time on their shift to get to them. It was the fact that the crews didn't realise those bins existed or didn't know that they were up to them to empty. I mean, in a small way, I experienced exactly that, and it's not all about sort of new housing developments, because I don't have those in the centre of the city. I mean, what I'm talking about is a row of houses probably about 150 years old, and for some reason, these just got ignored, apart from eventual responses to telephone calls. So well into this programme, we're probably talking about weeks 9 or 10. And so the question really is, how is it that we've already understood that the actual implementation of these new routes on the 27th of February had been much deferred in time, and I think had its own consequences financially, but there was therefore no shortage of time to plan this ahead. How is it that it was possible for you not to know about all the bins that needed collecting by someone? We must have had that information, surely, and that would have been the resource that was used to allocate them to different routes. But it seemed that there were some bins that didn't get allocated to any route, and that's the source of a lot of mystery to me, that we could have got ourselves into a situation of not having checked we knew where the bins were before we tried to change the way they were collected.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points there, and I'm sure Jane might probably jump in on others. Just in terms of the individual bin issue, I obviously dealt with quite a few people who've got in contact and linking up the issue of the individual bins. From what I could see as the Executive Councillor at the time, the issue in an awful lot of cases, obviously not all cases, was that where two rounds met, so for example, years ago I used to live in Hartington Grove. Hartington Grove, in theory, would be on one bin round, but everyone in Hartington Grove, in about 10 houses, puts their bins out on Marshall Road. In the case of where I live now, Victoria Road, half the street puts its bins out on one side, but the round changes straight down Victoria Road to the road behind Hilda Street. So the round that was doing Victoria Road, for example, on a Wednesday for me, I think it was, there's a different round that would do the same bin on a Thursday at the back. So it's not a case of where it all fell within the patchwork, so that all those streets, no matter which side of your house you put the bin out on, it would have been got because the surrounding roads around your house were going to be had. It was where on the borders there were a particular issue where someone would have, in Cambridge and terraced housing, a house out the back rather than at the front. Now, I don't think it's realistic in terms of us, because we don't have a system in Cambridge, no council has a system where every bin's labelled. When they've tried before, they've been accused of obviously snooping on people's bins, and probably rightly so. It's very hard unless the address is on the bin, of which it's not on that many in Cambridge, to know which bin relates to which property, apart from proximity to property. Apart from that, in terms of the distribution between crews, it was clear, as far as I was concerned early on, that we had to try out the routes, and the only way we're going to know that is by and know that certain crews have too much and certain crews don't have as much, is to let it bed in. And we weren't helped at the time. I remember you emailed me early on about related but different issue. We weren't helped by having situations on the A10 very early on, which sort of wiped out a week's worth of data, where we had a fatality and it pushed the entire week out of sync. So that data wasn't useful for us. And then we had another incident on the A10 directly outside the depot. Again, we lost more data. And every time that happened, it pushed what the control essentially that we would use back, and crews were picking up catch up as well as the round, which exacerbated the problem in the extreme cases. And apart from that, in terms of individual bins, the only other point I would make is that when you obviously move the crews round and crews are working new rounds, the crews that we have, quite often when we recruit new crew, they go out in a team that already exists, who point out where everything is and how things unlock, where things are. Changing the system and changing the days, we had crews working brand new streets, and the obvious implication of that being that they had to learn the route, and that does take an awful lot of time. And as someone who actually has gone out with the bin crew, emptying hundreds, if not thousands, individually a day, to know the minutiae of where every single bin is on certain roads. And we know that from when we go canvassing and leafleting and all the rest. Certain houses are tucked away in certain pockets. Where we tried to improve, and I've no doubt Councillor Moore has continued, is trying to stop that repeated missing of that individual bin. The problem being that when often we quickly go and do the best thing, do the right thing as a council by catching up on getting that missed bin, it's not the crew that originally missed the bin that got the missed bin. So that being the problem, that obviously they still haven't learned where that bin is. So it's sometimes it can be a catch-22.
Jane.
Yeah, one of the big lessons learned, as I understand it from the previous window changes, were around the quality of the data. And one of the things that we insisted on, and was one of the reasons for not completing window changes sooner, was our determination to make sure the data was as close to 100% accurate as possible. The phenomenon you were talking about of not knowing that bins existed is something that I'm only aware of affecting around 8 or 9 properties, of around 120 to 130,000 depending on how you classify them. It has been a spectacularly good data set. The issue we have is around merging some of the management into the vehicles for crews to see, not around the quality base data itself. In fact, when we did our individual address mailing, which we only did in the city, for reasons of the complexity of the city compared to a village in South Cambridgeshire, which is far easier just to tackle by putting signs up, for example, we had somewhere between 200 to 400 letters returned by Royal Mail because we'd been overzealous in assuming the property had been completed and we would be collecting bin there. Because of the delay between mailing it out and actually getting to bin day changes, we were erring on the side of caution that completions would have happened. But in the instances of individual properties that have been there for a long time and we weren't aware existed, that's been absolutely tiny, to my knowledge.
So how many did you say that was?
A handful. I've just asked mine. We're not aware of there being very many at all. As Councillor Roberts has said, we have had more issues around collection where individuals can't understand why we haven't collected on the day we said we would when bins were placed on a different road to that which they live. And that is an issue in some parts of the city, particularly where we've got a bit of a rabbit hole in the streets and alleys and so on. And it's largely working with the residents, getting out and talking to them about it, that we've said, well, we won't change bin days. Councillor Roberts was one of the few to receive a change in bin day, which she was very delighted by, I'm sure, but it was because of exactly that issue when it kept them from the front of the back of the property. But I'm really happy if there are ongoing issues that we don't feel have been resolved to take those and address those and have a look at particular addresses.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'm astounded by the handful definition because I should think my ward would take ownership of that handful and the rest of the city that it needs accounting for. But what I'm wondering, because my colleagues had requested that there be a much more in-depth member process than this. And one of the things that we would have wanted to see was what kind of data against which crews were collecting in a particular area before 27th of February, and what kind of data they were collecting against after the 27th of February, straight after the reorganisation, so that we could understand actually what the quality of the data was. I wonder if that would be possible to provide.
I just want to clarify the question. So in other words, looking at a particular geography, identifying which individual properties were named at the time before and after window changes, it would be exactly the same data set. So I'm happy we can.
Well, it was exactly the same data set, and that was available to the crews doing the collecting. Then how could we get to a situation where some bins weren't collected?
No, I think no.
Could-
Well, correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll just add
Sorry.
indications from two different people. So, Suzanne.
I was just going to come in and say, I think there's a misunderstanding about the use of language here as to whether the data set knew about the bins and whether or not the crew on the day identified that those were bins they needed to collect. We have recognised there are some streets that got missed. James explained that there are some streets where the residents' perception maybe the crew didn't know they were there, they missed a street. It was on their list to complete, they hadn't learned the round, they didn't necessarily know exactly where all the streets were, and they managed to miss that street and return the depot without collecting it. Unfortunately, because a different crew then picked up, they went and re-missed it again next week. And Jane and Mike have been doing a huge amount of work with the crews, talking individually with them and with individual crew members coming in to help and support that process and making sure the crews learn where all the streets are. And as Jane's explained, we've now got the data to support that. It's not that the system didn't know, it's not that we didn't have the data, it's not that we didn't know the properties existed, it's about human error in implementing a massive change, an enormous change to 30,000 bins a day. We've explained there were crews out that didn't know the geography and they made mistakes. I'd like to say, I've said it before publicly and I think I'd like to say again, on behalf of Jane and Mike, the crews worked incredibly hard trying to learn those rounds, but they have made some mistakes along the way. They have had to work really hard because on new rounds they didn't know, so it takes longer, and they were running out of time to complete the rounds. But it wasn't about them not having the information, it was about them having to go through that learning process. I think we can reasonably confidently now say that they have learned their rounds. We've still got issues, and some of the issues that come up week by week are routine operational issues that you wouldn't look at every week normally, like the fact that it's been hot, or in the winter we'll have times when the bin suffer because it's cold, it's wet, it's icy, the A10's blocked. There are routine operational issues which week by week affect different parts of the city. So we won't ever achieve 100% performance over a prolonged period. There will be days when we achieve it, but we can always expect that if you look across the course of a month, there will have been days when things happen that get in the way. But we have got the data. We have got the data uploaded to the cabs, and we will continue to keep on top of that.
Right, this has been. Go on.
Thank you.
I'm
Just
keen to bring
clarify
this
another point
to
as well, in defence of the crews actually, who are fantastic, Davey, fantastic, amazed me, particularly on days like today. I'm very glad to be in the depot. One of the things as was a result of the software problems, is before window changes, it wasn't necessarily routine for all crews to use or rely on maps in the cabs. They have in-cab systems, electronic mapping, they know the rounds really well, they don't necessarily need to refer to maps. The maps we provided the crews were not as good as maps can be. They were the best we could produce at the time and with the availability of the software. And neither were we ever expecting that crews would need to rely on maps for as long as some of them had to through this process. So, yes, the data's been actually fantastic. The translation to crews has been fair, could have been better, and that is feedback we've had from crew members as well. So, because we've had to rely on maps for far longer than we anticipated, again, were we to go through the process again, the clarity of that mapping for them, it's about and braces, we thought it was good enough, we ended up using them for far longer than we anticipated. And that's where at an individual property level, we can't guarantee that 100% of them are always instantly identifiable simply because of the resolution of the mapping. But they have done an absolutely fantastic job at bearing with as well. We've had to be trying to update the software for them for their in-cab units as well. Just wanted to make that point. We could have helped them more.
Right. It seems that we are going round and round a bit. Now, if we look at the recommendations, no. we look at the recommendations, it's all about what we do in the future, the things we adopt, the things we avoid. And it seems to be that the debate that's going on is all putting these things into question. So it's now my intention to go to the vote on the recommendations.
Chairman, you're concerning debate on this subject?
Yes.
You're concerning debate?
Yes.
This was supposed to stand in place of a member review of what happened over the last 3 or 4 months, 6 months. And you're containing it. We've got many questions to ask. And I wouldn't say we barely started, but there's a fairly large amount more to come. And I'd just like to understand if you are consciously cutting that out.
Like I say, I am keen to bring this to a close. So can you bring people? I'll allow this, but I want you to be concise. Councillor Bix, Councillor Tyson.
Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to second the comments that have just been made about the hard work, and I take my hat off to all who've been involved in what has been a very complex operation. So my comments should be seen in that light. Although we have touched on the question of flats, I do believe there is a particular issue with regard to flats. And one of my questions is, why were extra resources not given to flats? Because the discussion around the table has indicated there was an awareness of the complexity of flats. And I know something about that because I have been on the receiving end of extremely unhappy people where the flat owners have been trying to store their waste in their kitchens and in their bathrooms, and it has been pretty dramatic. And so I would really like an answer as to why weren't extra resources given to the flats. And I think it's a strategic question which the Executive Councillor ought perhaps to participate in. It's not an operational matter initially, it's the big picture. In regard to the flats, could I ask why the managing agents do not appear to have been notified? The ones that I have spoken to have certainly not been notified. And it does say on page 97 that in week 2 we worked with the city housing team to direct extra crews, so there was an awareness of the need for extra crews, but city housing teams only, I think, manage or work with council flats, council properties. What I'm talking about is the large and increasing number of private blocks of flats that we have in Cambridge, where these problems have been very acute. So why would the managing agents not notified? And in a very small way, that continues to today. One block of flats in my ward has received a letter pointing out certain types of bags which are not allowed to go into the green bins, which was a side issue. But one block of flats has received a communication from the council, and another block of flats hasn't. So, there are still glitches in this particular area, and has left me very, very concerned about the service. And I would like to propose that the council sends an apology to blocks of flats in the city that have suffered in this way, because I think there's been a lot of distress out there.
Jane.
Thank you.
when we look at planning day changes, flats are considered as a separate issue to domestic properties because they often are serviced by a separate vehicle as they have different bins. They have the large bins which are suitable for communal areas, and an entire round is generally dedicated to flats, which is one of the ones which had significant changes to it. We incorporated onto that round some of the bins which had previously been collected on domestic vehicles servicing houses, which had flats along their route, and we have been able to variously put bin stores into the flats round or take them out depending on how we have found the sort of, achievement of that round has progressed. We worked very closely with one of the drivers who's got a huge amount of experience on that round, and he gave us a lot of feedback before, during and after the day change processes on what would and wouldn't work. And you know, far be it for us to ignore that sort of knowledge. They are dealt with in a planning process as a set of residences in their own right, with slightly different needs to domestic properties. So they are strategically, as it were, as part of operational planning, considered in their own right. As I said in the paper, we've learned, particularly around communications with residents, we always have ongoing issues with liaising with managing agents. It's one of the vagaries of the job, really. We have an officer who deals a lot with lots of managing agents and has relationships with many of them. Some of them choose not to have a relationship with us. We can't enforce that. We have ongoing discussions with them, largely also around access issues, which were a major problem for residents, which is not necessarily seen by them as being a problem on the part of managing agents, but it's often seen as our problem. And as I said in the paper, a paragraph I didn't mention around access, which continues to cause us huge problems because we cannot enforce, although we are looking to achieve a lot more consistency in the method and the code and the key access to bin stores. One of the other issues which we now have, and we do feel that we largely resolved early a lot of the repeat or individual problems with flats and flat bins. But one of the issues we do repeatedly have and will always affect us to some extent is access. And of course, a parked car outside a domestic property will affect a domestic property. Often fans, scaffolding, builders, others around flats will affect protection for 20, 40, 60, 80 residents. We have crews who go out, radio in, that they've repeatedly visited on 3 occasions in the morning, they've gone back to try and access block flats and just can't get in. And those are the sorts of routine problems where we want to, and we try actively to have a good relationship with managing agents. With regards to one block of flats receiving letters about contamination and another not, that would be because we focus our communications on where we have had a problem with contamination. So we don't blanket mail anybody over particular issues. It's expensive, but it's not focused, it's not productive. But where we have a problem, and we might have 9 out of 10 residents in the block doing exactly the right thing with recycling, and the 10th goes down and puts huge chunks of polystyrene in blue bins, we can't accept the waste. We have to pay for it to be landfilled, and that affects everybody. So where we refuse to take it because it's contaminated, we feel, go the extra step and try and help educate those residents so that we don't have to refuse the waste again. It causes endless problems. So we do consider them as a bespoke set of issues. We have learned a lot from doing this process with regards to flats. I don't think, with the benefit of hindsight, we would have planned anything any differently. We would have involved a few different people, but I'm not necessarily sure that attempting to communicate directly with all the managing agents would have resolved many of the problems that we've actually found with bins relating to flats.
Councillor Roberts.
I was just going to add to that obviously in the binary split between private and public housing, we have full control over issues of access as the landlord. And equally, what would usually happen is if you take an area where there's a high density of council housing in my ward at the top end of the Thorpeway area, the Thorpeway estate, if there's contamination, we would call out a crew to remove the contamination to access the bin, which then means that the bin crew aren't going to wait there for the sofa or the mattress or whatever's been put in front of a communal bin that's blocking access. But equally, as a council, we have an obligation to investigate it. It's on public land. It's very different with private property. What to us is fly tipping on public land isn't necessarily fly tipping to someone else on private land. And equally, there are, from memory as well, some private landlords actually opt for external contractors for their waste for different reasons. They're part of linked in with shops where the flat is and so on, and they share. And in not with this in the case of the bin round changes, but in previous cases where Councillors have come to me and asked about, on at least 2 occasions, it wasn't even our company. It was a completely private company of the council. So you can't underestimate the access issue. And in terms of the flat ground, which is the Chamberlain land, it was identified very early on that it's going completely to plan, and we did put the extra time and resource in to try and solve some of the problems. The briefing that was held in this room in December, we were quite clear that we're not going to foresee every single problem. If it weren't for this problem, it would be a different problem before this happened. You only really can plan for what you know beforehand, but most of what we discover is only through trial and error. We don't have the resources to factor in every eventuality as a council. It's not realistic.
Councillor Ben.
I could run through my remaining questions, Chair. I'll group them all together, Chair, if that helps to deal with this. One of the other things that we'd asked in the run-up to this meeting was about related in a way to the heat diagram that you described, about the record of complaints, which could give a similar kind of guide to where the problems were coming from. But we were told that it wasn't possible to supply a list of the complaints that had been registered. I wonder if it would be possible for us to see that when the final report is prepared in 3 further months. And perhaps also if you could comment on a suggestion that was made to me by someone's experience, and you get all sorts of things, and this is a chance to refute, of course, if there's nothing in it, that there was a confusion about whose responsibility it was to register complaints, whether it would be the City Council staff who were answering the phone to people in the city, or whether it should be South Cambridgeshire. And clearly one wouldn't want to sort of see a buck-passing issue get in the way of capturing of important data. But it would be good if the record of complaints, relevant to the city anyway, could be provided along with what you can ever get to in the way of a heat complaint map or a density map of the implementation issues. There was an intervention in social media on the part of a member of staff amongst the crews, and point taken down after a day or so. And I wonder what the management's view is about staff giving their views publicly on a matter of this kind, whether they're encouraged or discouraged, and a sense that, for my part anyway, that whistleblowing is not an entirely bad thing to have if it actually is enabling the public to understand better. I think there's another feature of the service. We're concentrating very much here on the collection of people's rubbish, but what I understand is that there are also some other elements of the total service that are suffering whilst all of this is being dealt with, and that's not I think really recorded in the report. For example, the customer service centre here is giving out that it takes 6 to 7 weeks to deliver a new bin to someone who needs one. Apparently, bins which are in stock in Waterbeach, physically present and correct, but apparently because of the reorganisation, people need to expect 6 to 7 weeks delay, and I wonder when that feature of the reorganisation will be rectified. I wanted to ask about resilience, because I think that is one of the bigger issues here. One of the reasons for doing this merger with South Cambridgeshire was about improving resilience. So by being bigger, we could take the knocks and make the service targets just the same, or even better. I just think there's a couple of things that we've heard about which calls a bit of that into question. So the first is that the process since February the 27th was knocked off course by traffic. And I mean, obviously your depot has to be somewhere. It's in Waterbeach, but clearly traffic hold-ups, accidents can happen, and there needs to be some kind of plan, I guess, that gives early warning to when that is the situation, so that the first lorry that hits the accident queue prevents all subsequent ones from doing that, so that we aren't looking at a complete catastrophe because of a road hold-up. And then the other issue about resilience is in the report, which talks about week 14, which is a week on page 29, which where there was a noticeable relapse in performance, which was caused partly by staff absence. And that is exactly the sort of thing, in terms of resilience, that I think we wouldn't be expecting to see out of a shared service which was trying to protect us from that sort of impact. So what sort of view do you have now about resilience, and can you make plans, and does the bigger service really enable us to avoid them in the future?
I'll let you answer that, and then I've got Councillor Bird.
Big Jane to take it as well.
Oh, okay. Carry on, Jane.
The review of complaints and commendations is something that is ongoing. Again, we deal with two different systems, but that's entirely understandable because residents are going to their council in order to make a complaint or a commendation. The shared waste service is not the public face of waste for each of the organisations. It's very important for residents, it's a big issue for residents, and I think it's really important for each council to hear that feedback, and then we deal with the complaint or the commendation. So the advice has always been for residents to complain if they feel the need to their council. We are aware of a few instances when an outsourced call handler advised some residents to complain to City if they'd been visited by a City vehicle, whereas actually they were a resident in South Cambridgeshire. There was a handful and it was very quickly resolved, but that's the only issue I'm aware of where people were sent the wrong place, as it were. Either way, all complaints get back to the same service and we deal with them all there. And we have processes for extracting data from the systems to understand what the trends are and the sorts of things we're having complaints about, so again we can feed back to the right folk as to what some of the major problems seem to be. Obviously miss bins has been a big complaint, of course for complaint, if we miss a bin, people will complain, understandably, but we've also had complaints again about where crews are placing individual bins and the stringency with which we're now applying the policy on things like biobags and various other items. So those are the sorts of things we track. We want to make sure that we are picking up and, for example, on the biobags, issuing more advice on the web page and so on to try and preempt and offer better advice to residents. And I would be happy, obviously, subject to the committee approving it, that what we do in terms of review of complaints should be available. As I say, we simply go through the waste board because that's our board for the shared waste service. With regards to social media, there are again, referring to your previous comment, there are different conditions of contract and policies on social media and reputation of the council for South Cambs and City operating each. A comment was taken down by an individual. Obviously we spoke with the individual, we spoke with the individual who spoke on the news, we speak with any individual who expresses a view which hasn't been expressed to us first. And for me, every individual has the right to comment. It is something that we're very mindful that employees are ambassadors of the organisation, and I am absolutely clear that everybody can have their own opinion. What I really, really am trying to encourage in the service is that we have that discussion and that constructive discussion right across the service. Any crew member is welcome to come talk to us, sit in the middle of the depot. We we've started a new style of drop-ins with the unions present as well, and really we're just encouraging people to talk to us first, partly because it is the reputation of the organisation, and partly because, for example, in a couple of examples recently, individuals have really agreed with their colleagues feel not fairly representing what is happening in the service. So it's something where I have to look out for all members of my team, not just the individuals who have something they wish to raise negatively, but also those who feel that it's not actually reflecting very well on them either. Service, whether or not other services are suffering while domestic issues are dealt with. With regard to bin deliveries, we have peaks and troughs in bin deliveries. We've just moved all of our stores up towards Beach Depot, so it's actually easier for us to get stuff out more quickly, and we have distribution across South Camden City. At the moment, I believe we're looking at around about 2 to 3 week lead time. I can understand that people may have been given a cautionary longer lead time because until last Tuesday we were waiting a new delivery for some colours, but they're all there and they are being delivered now. And yes, I believe that issue's been dealt with, but I will catch up with the call centre just to make sure we're consistent on messages that we're giving to customers on that. With regards to resilience, I'm a big fan of resilience, and I'm also a big fan of making sure that we plan for the right level of risk in service. So, for example, the heat we endured last week, I know you've commented before, around the fact that we need to plan for extreme events. For me, that's a very extreme event, and were we to plan for that sort of impact on service, that frequently we would have excesses of crews and costs because we don't normally go that slow effectively. With regards to traffic, yes, we are on the A10 and we do have traffic problems. We do have an early warning mechanism where crews who are first alerted to issues tell everybody else because they're all on radio systems. So any issues with traffic are reported. We also hear that in the depot live, so we can get service alerts out to individuals. The week in particular, the second week of operation, second or first week of operation, the A10 was completely closed because of fatality, and we had significant roadworks. Wherever, whether you've been based on Mill Road, Waterbeach, or Huntingdonshire, all of those vehicles have been going up the A10 to tip Milton. So that is one of those things. And in the months I've been there, and years Mike's been there, I've never had a week like it. But it's an extreme event, and it is something that we try and make sure we mitigate against. So we're permanently rediverting vehicles or asking folks to help each other out to make sure we make the full capacity of the vehicle. And with regards to staff absence, week 14, that was, again, as I said, an exceptional event. We had a very high level of absence on a make-up Saturday. And again, referring to your previous comment about terms and conditions, it's not a contractual obligation for every crew member to do overtime. It's something we rely on and we strongly encourage, and we pay accordingly. But it's not something at the moment we have full control over. And that's something, again, that we're looking at as a whole range of things we look at all the time to improve resilience. So, for example, on vehicles, not what we've raised, but I know has been queried before. We're also looking at working in a partnership way with the garage, City Garage, for them to actually own and operate and maintain spare vehicles for us to use while they are repairing our own vehicles, for example. We do now maximise the use of our fleet in an effort to not over-maximise the use of our staff, which is different from before day changes. So previously we had some vehicles that could be out of commission more often, and we are now maximising how we use those vehicles. So building more resilience into that in this relationship with the garage is something, again, we're actively looking at. So these sorts of changes are perpetually being looked at to make sure the service operates in a super smooth way. I hope that answers most of the questions.
Councillor Bird.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. And thanks, Jane, for the report. Very good. It's like any new thing you do, there's going to be teething problems. And we've had our teething problems, and I know we're getting through them. I've had problems, residents contact me about some of the flats, but when they're gated properties, it's hard for the crews to get in, as you know. And also, some of the flats, they ring up, they or email us as councillors, local councillors. We then pass on the information to people like Jane or Mike to tell them there's a problem at this certain area. There might be a bit of contamination, I can never say the word, but that's because of the residents not putting the rubbish properly in bags to stop it. I've seen photographs of one such flats in East Chesterton, and it was pretty bad. The bins were going to be emptied, but they still kept piling it in, and they all got ripped and stuff, so you can imagine what it was like. And I know you did your best to clear it up as soon as possible, but with the gated access, that's the worst. And also, if they've got a key and someone's lost the key, that's another problem. so that we can get round it. And I think we're doing really well with the service at the moment. It's getting better every week. So I think we're getting through the teething problems. I just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you for that. It seems to me that all the issues raised are actually covered in the recommendations that we're actually voting on. So I'm going to now move to the vote. So I'm not going to read all the recommendations, but they are for to adopt policies that work and avoid policies that don't, basically. So all those in favour of the recommendation? Against? Abstain. Thank you. We now move on to by the way, sorry. Does the Executive Council agree?
Yes, I agree to adopt the recommendations, and I'd just like to thank everybody, particularly Jane for her hard work in this report, and for all the officers and all the waste crews for their ongoing hard work in these changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Moore. We will now move on to item 8, which is the 16-17 revenue and capital outturn carry forward, significant variances, environmental services and signature central portfolio, and it is Chris Humphries to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mallow Executive Councillor, members, colleagues, members of the public. This is the first of 2 reports on the financial outturn of the Council for this particular portfolio is Environmental Services and City Centre, and this is the outturn for the year ended 31st of March 2017, and it covers revenue, capital, and any specific recommendations. If you move to the table on page 104, shows the revenue outturn, which shows a final budget of 4,339,000. It's in the third column of the sheet towards the bottom, and an outturn of 4,511, which is an overspend of £172. I'll come to that in a moment. The capital outturn was a final budget of £1,140,000. Sorry, the budget was £1,140,000, with an outturn of £739,000, an underspend of £401,000, with £394,000 of the underspend being requested to be carried forward. If you then move to page 106, which is Appendix A, it lists in detail the performance by service areas, which we call service groupings. On Appendix B, we have the explanation of the major variances coming to the 172,000 underspend. Appendix C, we have no revenue carry forward requests, and in Appendix D, we have the details of the capital outturn position and carry forward requests. So now, if there's any questions, I'm happy to pick them up with any further details you require.
Open to members. Looks like you've done a good job, Chris. So as there's no comments or questions, I'll put it straight to the recommendation, straight to the vote. The recommendation is the Executive Council is recommended to request that the Executive Council Finance and Resources and the Strategy and Water Resources Scrutiny Committee on 3rd of July 2017 approves the following. A, I don't know why they've got A there, because it's the only recommendation. Carry forward request of 394k capital resources from 2016-17 to 2017-18 and to fund phased net capital spending as detailed in Appendix D. All those in favour? That's carried. As we're... Oh, and does the Executive Council agree?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
I was ahead of myself there. As we're changing portfolios, it's my suggestion we take a 5-minute break. Would you prefer a 10-minute break, Councillor Bird?
Yeah, just so I can get going. Yeah, please.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Chris is...
Well, the next item is also Chris.
Oh, right. Well, I'll wait then.
No, you're right, Joe.
I think
You need a new executive council.
Yeah, you certainly do.
I'm staying for 10 minutes. However, other people have been here writing for over an hour and a half. So we'll have a 10-minute break. Have we missed anybody? All right, then. So then we'll carry on. Item 9, the revenue and capital outturn carry forwards and significant variance, planning policy and transport portfolio, key decision. I'll bring in Chris Humphreys again to present item 9.
Thank you, Chair. As in the previous portfolio, there are 3 particular items. The revenue, income and expenditure for 2016-17, the capital, and also any carry forward requests. Moving on to page 112, the final budget for this portfolio was a net income of 621,000, and the outturn was net income of 934,000, an underspend of 313,000. There are carry forward requests of 11,000, leaving a net variance of 301,000. Moving on to the top of page 113, in respect of capital, the final budget was 6,388,000, with the outturn at 3,151,000, giving a variation, an underspend of 3,237,000. There are carry forward requests of 3,096,000, and these are all detailed in capital in respect of Appendix D. If you move on to page 114, you'll see the individual variances or outturn position for individual areas of the business of the council. And in Appendix B on page 115, you'll see the explanation for the major items. Appendix C shows a carry forward, and this is a single carry forward in respect of conservation reviews. And also on Appendix D on page 117, there are the capital items with the carry forward requests, the majority of which are in respect of the Green Deal scheme, which has now been completed in the 17-18 financial year. So I'll now take any questions.
Over to councillors. Councillor Beck.
Chair, on the revenue variances, I was intrigued to know more about the underspend due to the underuse of current taxi card vouchers by eligible customers, described on page 115. I wonder that's out of a budget of how much, and what is going on? What's the driver behind that shortfall.
The budget for this particular area is 118,000, as you can see, with expenditure of 71,000. This is consumer-led, so if there is no demand, then the vouchers are not spent. And that, as far as I know, is the area. This is the position for this financial year. In the current financial year, 2017-18, I understand a review is being undertaken of the use of the cards.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions on the taxi card service as well. I know it's a fantastic service for many elderly and disabled people. My concern is the criteria. Will the criteria be looked at when we update the services? Because I find that some elderly people in the age range of sort of 75, 85 have a problem getting a taxi card.
That's actually not within my area of knowledge, but I'm sure it will be one of the criteria looked at, as the whole service will be. I'm sure the director can agree with that.
Perhaps Suzanne can come in and answer.
Oh, sorry.
I don't
Wrong
have
director.
details. Well, I'm the only director you've got tonight. I don't have details of what is planned on the review, but yeah. Do you know exactly what's planned on the review? We can report back to committee
I'll
on
cover
it.
it. If there's other questions, I'll cover those as well, as I normally do in the summer.
Okay, then, there being no more questions, then I'll move to the recommendation. And the Executive Council is recommended to request the Executive Council of Finance and Resources at the Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Committee on 1st July 2017 approves A. Carry forward request for £11,230 revenue funding from 2016 to 2017-18 as detailed in Appendix 6. And B. Carry forward the request of £3,096,000 capital resources from 2016 to 2017-18 to fund rephased net capital spending as detailed in Appendix D. Can we go to the vote on that? All those in favour? Does the Executive Council
Yes, I do, Chair. And just in response to the taxi card issue, this is not the first year there's been an underspend on the taxi card budget. I think last year was an underspend as well. And I had a discussion with Mr. Kelly. I think it's sensible to have a review in terms of, is it attractive to the potential users still? Is it effective in terms of how the criteria works and you know, making it as sort of usable and as in a sensible sort of way now than perhaps, you know, compared to 5 years ago, whether we need to look at that criteria particularly in terms of making it more attractive to the potential users. We know the users are there, it's just for some reason they're not using it as much as they used to traditionally before. We need to sort of have a good look at that, and I may call on your expertise, if I may, Councillor Bird, to assist us in that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we move on to item 10, which is the provision of civil party enforcement services for the City Council, and Sean Clear to present.
Thank you, Chair. The Executive Council is to authorise officers to negotiate and agree the terms and conditions of a new agency agreement between Cambridge City Council and Cambridgeshire County Council for the management of civil parking enforcement in Cambridge. This delegated enforcement is to also include the recovery of penalty charges for a period of up to 5 years from July the 1st, 2017.
The civil parking enforcement, otherwise known as CPE, assists in the management of objectives such as helping reduce congestion, encouraging correct, sensible and safe parking, improves compliance with parking restrictions, and ensures designated parking spaces are used by those they are intended for example, blue badge. A new agency agreement will be required to determine the costs and revenues resulting from civil parking enforcement within Cambridge City car parks, and any civil parking enforcement arrangements are intended to be self-financing or cost neutral, with the income from any penalty charge notices paying for the enforcement of the parking regulations. The new agreement will need to include specific arrangements for dealing with any surplus and deficits resulting from enforcement activity in order to minimise the financial risks to the City Council. Since 2010, the County Council has enforced the City Council's parking restrictions in relation to its off-street parking as the Council's agent. It is intended to renew this arrangement and therefore to enable the County Council to operate those powers as its agent for the City under a new agency agreement. The Department for Transport's operational guidance to local authorities is that parking policy and enforcement on the Traffic Management Act 2004 emphasises the need for cooperation between district and county councils in delivering parking enforcement. Therefore, the Executive Council is being asked to delegate authority to the Parking Services Commercial Operations Manager to negotiate and agree the terms of the new agency agreement between Cambridge City and Cambridgeshire County Council so that parking restrictions can be enforced in City Council car parks and parking spaces as covered by the City of Cambridge Off-Street Parking Places Order 2017. I'll take any questions, thank you.
Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Sean. Just want to ask you how we keep an eye on the quality of service we get from the County Council, and I don't suppose it's a conflict of interest for them, but obviously they've got their own on-street parking to think about, and as well as looking after our off-street parking, how do we make sure that we're getting the right level of service for what we need?
I meet quarterly with my counterparts at Cambridgeshire County Council, and that's to review the agency agreement and to establish that they actually meet our terms and conditions in the way they deliver such services. The new agency agreement will build on that, and there'll be a request for monthly meetings, and that's also to be able to review usage and patterns of enforcement that are occurring in and around the city centre.
Is this on the same subject, Mike? Carry on.
So there are some sort of metric, I hope, within that which you can assess the quality of the service. Are we actually independently ourselves observing what's going on in our car parks and the transgressions and that sort of thing to make sure we're happy with the service?
We are. The car parking staff regularly review attendance of those car parking enforcement officers. Not so much to catch them out, but to establish that we are actually receiving what we're asking for. And in the same vein, it's a two-way process. They have the same entitlement to ask us how we are managing our processes in the review and feedback of their services.
Councillor Beck.
I'm looking at the paragraph on financial implications and see that it states that the new arrangement will need to include specific arrangements for dealing with surpluses and deficits in the provision of this service, which I understand. There's money generated from penalties and there's costs incurred in delivering them. But what has been our practice over recent years, what has been our experience in recent years, do we receive surpluses, or do we have to find money to pay for parts of the service that aren't covered by penalties?
Historically, the accounts balance themselves out year on year. We occasionally have an over or an under, and that could be, I think recently the most I've seen is probably a couple of £1,000 where that's occurred, but at the end of each financial year we can determine where there's going to be a shortfall in the following year, where we can counteract that and balance it all back up again. Moving forward, we have got a process where within those monthly meetings we'll have a monthly review process of those usages and issuing of parking charge notices, and be able to manage that accordingly.
Just a follow-up question to that. So is the issue of surpluses and deficits, is that regulated by a fixed formula take from the overall funding arrangements of the civil parking enforcement, or is it based on the actual costs of enforcing our car parks and the actual penalties coming from our car parks?
It's based on actuals. We can determine how many, where, when, and then cross-reference that to penalty charge fees.
Councillor Bird.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Sean, for your report. I just want to double check that the park enforcement team is still going to be checking disabled bays in car parks for anybody using it and they shouldn't be. And do they still check the blue badges belong to the person that's from the car?
They do, and they will.
Thank you.
Right, if there's no more questions, we'll move to the recommendation. The recommendation, which Sean very clearly almost read out word for word in his presentation, it is on page 119. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. And does the Executive Council agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do, Chair.
No need to comment then?
No. All the questions were covered.
Thank you. We move on to item 11, which is on page 1, 2 and 3, and it's the Cambridge Historic Core Conservation Area Appraisal. It's a non-key item, however it has been called in for debate. So it's Christian Brady and Susan to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We're equipped with the appraisal document itself, not to go through the slideshow, but just in case it's needed for reference. So the Historic Core Conservation Appraisal is returned to the Scrutiny Committee, having been here previously prior to public consultation, which is being completed, and we've been through the results of the consultation, which were a very extensive set of comments from a range of not only residents but representatives of some of the colleges and bodies, interested bodies such as Historic England. A very detailed set of responses, many of which we've been able to amend the consultation draft to take account of. And they've ranged from items like why aren't there more electric points for street traders, to why are there so many adverts and kiosks on Silver Street Bridge, to what about the strategic effects of growth around Cambridge on the historic core. So a very wide range of comments. And
in that respect, the historic core appraisal has been seen by all things to all men in some cases. And I think there's a tendency to consider that the appraisal should contain a lot of policy information, which is more properly included in the local plan, for instance, and in several documents which are going to emerge shortly, such as the public realm strategy, which is announced in the local plan, or the spaces and movement strategy. So I think we need to bear in mind some distinction between the primary role of the appraisal, which is essentially a survey document. It's a survey of the conservation area to identify what is special and needs to be protected or enhanced for the future. So a distinction between that survey and more sort of management-based or policy-based documents. With that, I refer you to the appendices. Appendix 1 is the table of responses, and 2 is the reworked, largely archaeologically based statement on the development of Cambridge, which benefits from, for instance, a greater understanding of the archaeology that was under the Grand Arcade, which wasn't available to us previously. It's actually quite a state-of-the-art interpretation now, that section of the document. There's a lot of new understanding of the way that the Roman settlement was more than just something concentrated on Castle Hill, and that the Saxon settlement was probably associated with the Backs area and the east of the core. So some quite interesting new material. Thank you.
Leave it open to members. Councillor Bick.
So I spent a very long number of hours reading the document and an even longer period reading all of the comments on the document. And I must say that the outcome of this is that it's a recommendation that I'm pretty disposed to support. I mean, obviously some of the consultation input falls outside the domain that has been set for a conservation area appraisal. And you know, I have pieced together myself why that makes sense. That there is a value of having an inventory or a survey of what contributes to the context and character of the conservation area, and that's a very important guide to interpreting the local plan and other policy documents, because it tells us what we mean by context and character and such terms as that. And I also get it that there is a big value in separating the survey or the inventory of what it is that makes for the what we want to conserve or enhance, to separating that from what we want to do in the future, or how we want to manage that scenario. And I think the value of that is that you don't then compromise up front or make it up on the hoof when you have a planning application or when you want to secure a different way of managing in the future. And it is valuable that we articulate it as a conservation plan separate from everything else. But one of the things that you see in the input is some frustration with that from some of the people giving input. And I think that's understandable because there's obviously lots of pressure around the historic core. And I think it's right that we divert that to the right kind of process that is also envisaged. But the thing that I am unhappy about is the fact that the document doesn't include the open spaces that are also part of the historic core. And reference is made somewhere to documents like these, which are now from 2001. This is the East Conservation Plan, and I believe other open spaces have similar documents. And comment is made by some of the people we've consulted that that's really getting quite a long time ago, and just like we are doing our appraisal of the physical built environment, though we did it before, it needs updating. It's also, to my mind, true that an exercise needs updating for the open spaces. I mean, it's not true that because there are open spaces there's no development. Obviously there isn't much development, and that's merciful, but when that happens, and even if it's the council itself that wants to make those developments, then it's important that we have a properly articulated statement of what it is we want to conserve or enhance, separate from dealing with whatever development comes along. And my concern is that, just like we're saying, we must have that separation between policy and survey for the built environment. We should have the same for the open spaces. And I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to respond to those people we consulted who said roughly the same thing. And it seems to me quite a missed opportunity that we haven't got it in front of us. And I'd be interested in the officer's comments on that issue.
And on that, I'll bring in an officer.
Councillor Dick, I'm going to take this from a broad perspective, which is to say that the work on open spaces is not solely a conservation issue, and I'm sure Mr Brady may want to come in and comment on the conservation aspects, but a lot of what we do in terms of the open spaces is about biodiversity, it's about ecology, it's about the wide range of uses of the parks. I've certainly become aware in recent months through conversations with a number of residents' representatives as well as ward councillors of the level of interest that there is in moving forward with reviewed plans for our parks. And those of you who have the pleasure of also sitting on the Community Services Committee will be delighted to sit through proposals for the review of streets and open spaces later this week. And one of the things that we are committing to as part of that review of streets and open spaces service is to work with residents groups, park users and anyone else with an interest in it through reviewing, refreshing and fundamentally redrafting plans for the parks. That will involve looking at what we have that needs to be preserved, but it will also involve some survey work with a wide range of different people who have interests in using the parks to try to balance the competing uses of those. Can't give you today timescale for when each and every plan will be completed, I'm afraid, because I haven't got it to hand, but we'll be happy to update members through the Community Services Committee on progress on parks, and I'm sure to feed back to here also.
Councillor Tunnicliffe.
Can I just come back on that, Chair?
Mr Brady's comment. Okay, I'll take Mr Brady's comments first, then I'll bring you in, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I acknowledge that there's tremendous interest in these open spaces, quite properly. And as Suzanne's mentioned, there are plans to update management of those spaces. And I brought one of the old conservation plans with me. So yes, this one runs to 55 pages. It's at quite a level of detail. The conservation area appraisal is already a very large document, and I'll just comment that I think there's the two pieces of work need doing, but probably as per the local plan and the conservation area appraisal, there's a place for each, and that they're all incredibly important pieces of work, but it probably does need to be separate. The other point is to say that we haven't ignored these spaces. those are the crisis pieces. First page of the existing appraisal up on the screen, and there are similar 2 to 3 page summaries of Parker's Piece, Jesus Green, Co-Fen, and so on. So they are in there, and there's a section at the back of the document which also comments on the public spaces. I think the real detail needs to be in another document.
Well, I'm more worried from those answers, well, from Suzanne's answer than I even started off, because the issue about the council's role and open spaces and conservation issues is twofold. I mean, we are a planning authority and we are also a landowner. Now, if you transfer this to the built environment, we would never dream of letting the landowner or potential developer tell us what it was that we wanted to conserve. And the reason for articulating these things, in my opinion, is that there should be a statement from a planning perspective of conservation interest in the open spaces, which then becomes an input to what the Streets and Open Spaces part of the organisation and community services would envisage in terms of development or management. But it seems to me that if there's a reason to separate these two things, in fact, every other thing that we talk about planning for, buildings, there ought to be a reason for separating those when it comes to open spaces, even if that means saying that there are two separate jobs which need to be conducted by different parts of the organisation if this is to be done properly, and if we're to avoid compromising up front by having a great burning desire for a particular development, as we might have in Streets and Open Spaces, and therefore we wrap around the conservation element as to make that possible. It seems to me really necessary that we employ the same discipline for ourselves that we expect the rest of the world to comply with.
Councillor Tanaka.
Yes, very interesting indeed, and I'm very supportive of the work that's been done. But I share the frustration that some of the respondents have expressed. This is a piece in the jigsaw, and what I would like is, if possible, a timetable for the other elements in the jigsaw when we can have a holistic view of this incredibly important area, which feeds into planning, which is one of my areas, and so many other aspects of our work. So that would just be a request.
To answer the point on timetable, we are expecting work to be undertaken on both the conservation management plan of the historical and the spaces and movement strategy during this year. So without knowing at this stage what the end dates will be, because particularly on spaces and movement, we are aiming to bring in some resource for that. But it's imminent work. It's going to start this year.
Yep, and complete.
I'm not sure of the completion date yet.
I was just going to say, we'll be happy to report back to you on the completion date. I'm afraid we haven't got planning colleagues here that can report on exactly when it's due to complete. I know it's due to happen this year, but clearly it has a phased delivery and some consultation of its own. So we can send around an email later letting you know the timescale for that. Just in terms of the question of separation, these spaces and movement planning document will be key in looking at the future of parks and open spaces, and will be an opportunity again for people to look at how we use those from a planning point of view. The majority of what will be picked up in the Streets and Open Spaces work, as in some of the work that was done previously, is not necessarily around things that would require formal planning permission, but very much around making sure that we understand how we use those spaces, and we'll make sure that that's picked up alongside the streets, the spaces and movement SPD.
One other area which I think links to the open spaces is the river, which gets a rather perfunctory mention on page 128. I would like to see the river given a much higher profile. I think it, in parts it has suffered from a certain laxity, a certain amount of development. Thinking on Fen Road, is one particular sore point where the banks of the river have become private places, which I think is fundamentally against what rivers should have and be.
The river was certainly raised by at least one respondent, probably more, and we have undertaken in the table of responses to introduce a longer section on its importance, both from historical, cultural, and also landscape setting points of view. And it's also intended to refer to the local plan policy on the River Cam, which we've got up on the screen there. So again, there'll be a reinforcing process between the appraisal and the local plan.
Just a little tail piece to that. Will that involve consultation and discussion with the Conservatives of the camp declaring an interest? I am City Council representative on the Conservatives board and would like to see them involved, perhaps more than they have been.
Well, I think that's the type of concern that the conservation management plan will be able to address. So, although for finalising the appraisal, that's not, we don't want to start another round of consultations. But yeah, I appreciate the points. There are stakeholders that will need to be pulled in for the management plan. So.
Councillor Ratcliffe. Though I don't intend to contribute any further to the debate at this point, it's probably worth noting as Councillor Tunnicliffe has raised the issue of the Conservatives in the debate that I too am a City Council appointee to the Conservatives.
I think declaration of interest, yes, but not independence. Nothing like that. Well, in that case, there seems to be no more.
I'd like to move my amendment when you come to the voting bit.
You can move your amendment now, because I'm going to go to the recommendation straight after.
Okay. Well,
Chair, it's, it just bears out what I've said earlier on in the questions and answers, that I think this document is fine so far as it goes. Fully intend to put my hand up to approve it. I do think there is a gap on the open spaces. The amendment would add a further recommendation which would not hold up the process of approving what's in front of us, but would start a process of adding to it as conservation appraisals could be conducted over a period of time. I accept there's work involved in that, and it's not about creating something that happens at breakneck speed, but that will then be added to with similar documents on the major open spaces. I continue to believe that separation is important between management and development on the one hand, and the surveying of what we've already got on the other hand. And it worries me that the answers that have been given are all about proposals for management plans or SPDs, which, as the report very capably tells us, are all about plans for the future and ambitions for the future. A conservation appraisal is about creating the list of defining what it is that we want to conserve or enhance. And I think that's a very important starting point, and it cannot be done in the same exercise as the one where people want to maybe change something for the future or manage it in an ongoing way from now. So the proposal is that we would ask officers through the Executive Councillor to add to this document for open spaces as resource made that possible.
Any debate? Right, so what's the form here? Do I take the amendment first and then vote on the substantive? Mm-hmm. So all those in favour of the amendment? Against? No, I'll go to the original recommendation then. The Executive Council is recommended to approve the Cambridge Historic Core Conservation Appraisal Review incorporating the amendments set out in the report appendices. All those in favour? And does the Executive Council agree to that recommendation?
Yes, I do, Chair. And I've just referred to Councillor Bigg's proposal. I understand the point he's making about the difference between setting and management of that space or area. I do appreciate the difference between the two, and I understand what he's getting at. I think that from my perspective, there is some substantial work that the conservation team have to be undertaken this year, particularly the two pieces of work that we refer to, the spaces and removal, supplementary plan document, public ground strategy, various other workload, workstream parts of their programme that I think we've agreed are our priority this year. I would certainly obviously bear in mind the point you're making about need to update some of these long-standing documents for individual open spaces, but the fact that one you referred to, the apartment piece on Whistle Common, was produced in 2001, hasn't been updated since, would suggest that there hasn't been an urgency to update it as yet. Maybe that's wrong, but that will, I think, give you an indication of that. And clearly there are references to many of our substantial open spaces in the work we are doing in various guises, as Suzanne referred to as well. But I will certainly bear that in mind in terms of next year's workload in terms of that programme.
Thank you. That will now come to the last item on the agenda, item 12, which is Building Control 2017-18 Business Plan. We do not have the officer present here, however, the item is non-key, but the appendix to the report is confidential. So it's not for a vote.
It's not been called in, Jess.
Exactly. That's your notes. I thought I had to say that. So there's nothing to decide, so it's just for the committee to know. Okay.
No, there is a decision to be made, Chair, but it's without the
Okay. So does the Executive Councillor approve the recommendation?
Yes, I do, Chair.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll now close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.